Unmute there.
Can you hear me, Les?
I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Got to charge my headset, so I'm flying under radar of the computer. How are you this morning?
How am I this morning? You know what? Bit by bit, I think is the best way to describe it.
What's up?
I've been, I call it bit by bit in that
Yeah.
I recognize that I've been, I don't know, again, it's all relative, off kilter, disturbed, not feeling like I'm in sync with what's going on, a little bit perplexed by business and personal relationships, blah, blah, blah. But I'm looking at it and trying to keep an even keel and feel better about it. So I'm okay if I let myself be, or I can be upset, which I don't want to be.
Unlies the fight.
I think that was a long, drawn out answer for what you wanted to hear was fine.
No. I was actually that is a much better answer. I would say that that's much more accurate. I'm going to start the recording since we've started right out of the gate. Good morning, Jenna.
Don't you like it when I like this morning kind of thing because I'm like a whistleblower to a mental obsession with its lighting.
So,
Good morning, Jana.
all right, so we are actually recording. So I would say, Les, given the answer to the question, how are you, was lengthy, but I also would suspect that it's accurate in terms of an observation. The idea of trying to feel better than it and trying to get rid of the discomfort is exactly what maintains the comfort or the discomfort. And my experience is that noticing the words that you're using in the experience you're having are very accurate assessments of the thinking you're doing and what's going on with you as a result. And if they're looked at accurately, there's a good chance you can do something about it productively. Not necessarily get over the feeling and try to feel better about it, but actually look at it and say, this is actually my body language telling me, like a dashboard, and the light is flashing that there's no oil in the car. It's telling me that you might want to pay some attention here. And I would say that's our instinctive nature, guidance system toward health, toward survival, toward thriving. It's teaching us. And my experience and my history was trying to get over it, trying to feel better than it, because it's uncomfortable to feel those things. But those things you're feeling are the opportunities and actually the awareness of what may be wrong and or simply thought of as wrong. It may be that some of those things are just going the way they're going, and you're thinking of them only in the way you think they should be going. You there?
Yes, Jack, I'm here. I don't again. I'm sorry. It's not so much a question of disagreement. It's a question of, for me, of articulation. So it's not that anyone is comfortable feeling disturbed or uneasy. For me now in this journey, what is happening is I'm a little bit surprised by the way, I'm having a thread of actions, interactions, whatever, with other people, and I can't understand. I'm having a difficulty realizing or understanding why things are going the way they are. So it's actually for me at this point, what is my role? Why is this happening? Or what am I misunderstanding or over evaluating? And it's okay because it's one of those things that we do in the program that probably I don't do often enough or well enough, is that instead of either blaming or looking at, oh, it's their issue or it's issue, maybe it's something that's within me. And the concept, or at least the approach that I'm taking as a result of this feeling discomfort, I'm allowing it to look at it internally, which is great because what that really does is it allows me to potentially alter my perception, which frankly, if that's good. And a lot of what I feel like what we talk about here is if we can come from the basis that absolute reality is, and that our thoughts and feelings are variable, that if I'm feeling disturbed in the variance, it doesn't mean that that in any way impacts the absolute reality. And I should try to get more in tune with and accept the absolute reality. And therefore, I may not be as disturbed or waver as much.
Well, I'm going to take
it seems to ground me, I guess is the best thing. It seems to ground me as compared to using my feelings or my emotions as an anchor.
Well, can you still hear me okay?
Yeah. I hear you fine.
Okay. So that's very good. Very, very well put. Now, let's just say, just for the sake of not arguing, but just conceding, that if there's an absolute source, that's the anchor. It's already in place, always in place. And if I'm thinking of it as something that I need to ground, it's my thinking that's causing the sensation of not being grounded that I'm feeling. It's not the nature of that absolute state of being. It's what I'm thinking about it. And I would say within the context of sobriety, that's the spiritual malady. It isn't a spirit that's sick, it's how I think of it that is sick. Because I'm thinking of it only in terms of what I'm feeling, and I'm missing the fact that what I'm largely feeling is what I'm thinking, not reality and truth. Reality and truth, I would suggest, is probably absent of feeling because it doesn't require reason, it doesn't require belief, it doesn't require faith, it doesn't require trust. It simply is an absolute state of loving, giving, generous, supportive essence, not something that's negotiable. What's negotiable are the thinking, the thoughts we have, the choices we make, the thinking we do about it.
Well, I acknowledge and agree with what you're saying, but I would have my spin on it is it's not the spiritual malady. The spiritual is ever present and non-wavering, just like the absolute reality. It's my thinking, it's my mental obsession that somehow thinks, believes, perceives, feels that I can be separate from or disattached from reality or my spirit. So I and maybe an inaccurate, but it helps me to thinking that I can resolve or cure or improve my mental obsession with my mental thinking is a delusion. Whereas if I start and work on my spiritual malady connection and understand it, it seems to absolutely resolve my mental obsession because I put my spirit first and not my obsession. I meant it first.
So your mental obsession is coming from the choices you're making in your thinking.
Of course.
Okay. So if the absolute nature of existence isn't a choice, it's just an absolute state of being. We don't choose it. It isn't an option. It isn't a negotiation. Then any negotiation I'm doing with it has me believe that it is a negotiation, a choice, and something I'm in control of. What I'm really in control of is my experience, my human experience. And if I'm thinking about it as something I need to do for the sake of trying to get to terms with that thing, I'm missing the fact that somewhere in me, I have a belief that thing isn't permanent, it isn't ever present, it isn't absolute, it isn't always there. It isn't always my essence, that it's only my essence when I think it's my essence. And again, it then tracks back to thinking being our source. Now, this is subtle because you're speaking in terms that are incredibly accurate, very, very close, but I'm suggesting that there must be some thoughts, belief systems, ideas that you're still carrying, certainly I do, that are causing the effects, that are giving you the impression that you understand that the absolute is absolute, and now what you need to do is correct the thinking about it so you can finally feel it, rather than see you're already feeling it, and it's the actual, the conflicts that you're noticing, the wrong that you may be feeling, however it is you're describing it, is actually a reassurance of that knowing, because you wouldn't notice those variables as wrong or conflicted if you didn't have an absolute state of knowingness right now, it's in perfect order.
I think the I don't say distinction difficulty when we talk about absolute reality, or that reality doesn't need me one way or the other, reality always has been, is it's just a moment. Okay, somehow, some way in my thinking or my perception is I may be part of reality, but I am not the absolute reality. And therefore my thinking, even though my physical being exists in this space and this time, that my thinking is as variable. So therefore I sometimes perceive the absolute reality as being separate from me, and at best I'm a part of. And therefore, again, too much reliance on my thinking, but to believe that, I'm just part of the absolute reality, and therefore this thinking is incorrect. I don't know that whatever. I mean, I operate more on natural thinking than I do on, the things that I don't biologically need to consider, like breathing and stuff like that.
So, couple of considerations. And again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know if you know it. If we have this absolute state of being, when you talk about I may be a part of that thing, you're really identifying your thinking as the I you're thinking of yourself as being. You follow that? You've identified yourself as what you think, and that's who you are.
Well, no, I identify my thinking as my ability to perceive at best I can with what my thinking permits, or the extent that it has of my either being absolute or otherwise.
So when you said I may be a part of it, I'm suggesting to you that the I isn't a part of it, it's the essence of it. Because you can't, in an absolute state, there are no parts or pieces. It either is absolutely everything or it is absolutely nothing, just as Bill described in the book. Is everything.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Just because absolute means total and complete, correct?
Yes.
And total and complete doesn't mean that it doesn't have parts. It's that the sum or the accumulation of all those parts equals the total.
I would say in the spiritual realm, you're talking about something that doesn't exist in parts and pieces because they could be separate, and that would somewhat nullify the point of it being cohesive and absolute.
Well, that distinction between the spiritual and the physical world is probably where you can call it my thinking versus my spiritual malady. But that's probably where I don't call it a disconnect, but where my perception of how to look at things. So if the absolute reality, if we're talking about as an essence as compared to physical materials or whatever, and that the essence is everything and absolute, and that I and everything individual is part of it, then that would be a better way to look at it. So it's kind of almost look like I'm the soul, but I have a soul, but basically I'm looking at things through my physical body as compared to my spiritual essence.
Exactly. And that's a major transition here, because the key for me was when I realized that absolute means no exceptions, none. I can think they're there and they're not there. I can believe they're there and they're not there. I can have trust they're there and they are not there. I can have faith in them and they are not there. If it's an essence, it's an essence. Now here's one of the other differences too. The I, which interestingly enough, tracking back in language, is originally called ego. And yet what do we think of ego as? This separate thought-produced self. So we're even using the word ego incorrectly as compared to what it originally was, which was a capital I. If that I that I'm suggesting is absolute, then that's what you and I share. And so too, all that are and all that is, equally, ever presently, indiscriminately, inviolably, immutably, and absolutely. in common, exactly what the traditions were pointing to, unity. And anonymity, keep in mind, anonymity isn't just avoiding a stigma attached to my body because I might be identified as something that would be hard to have other people witness, an alcoholic, a drug addict, insane. Those are all things that people don't tend to graduate high school and say, I want to be insane when I grow up. I want to be a drug addict. I want to be an alcoholic. They don't tend to be goals. They're things that can be stigmatized. But the essence of anonymity is a faceless, personaless, characterless, absolute present state of being. It's
So there are two words that you used, unity and connected. Both of those to me infer pieces. There's nothing to be unit. There's nothing to unify if it's just one absolute essence, and there's nothing to connect if it's all one anyhow.
It wouldn't be one either.
So I don't know if those are word or language descriptions that help bridge the gap between the physical, the mental, and the absolute reality, or if, I don't say, I understand and accept and like the concept of starting with my spiritual malady is the best way to have a perspective or change and alter my mental obsession. But I also recognize that when I start having these kind of discourses, it's easy to play the intellectual or articulate game and frankly recognize that as much as I earnestly seek, I'm still physically, mentally based in most of my perceptions. And I guess that's why I have meditation and prayer.
So words by their nature are limited because they're attempting to define parts and pieces. So to reference something in absolute terms becomes tricky if we're looking at the words to define it rather than the essence of our awareness to begin to notice it. And that's why the spirit of this conversation is more important than the words used and the potential for those words to be used in ways that we can argue over and for and against and misuse or rewrap or start to put in a different order and think that somehow the words are ever going. They're all just references. They're all just it's like pointing at a mountain and thinking you're pointing to someone, pointing to a single tree on that mountain and are frustrated because somebody's not seeing the tree in a forest of trees on the side of a mountain. They can see the mountain, but they just don't see the tree. It doesn't matter so much that we define it if we're thinking in terms of spirit rather than the limited nature of thinking and reason and trying constantly to come up with something that puts our brain to rest, when in fact the doing of that and the attempt of that is what keeps the brain constantly recycling around this idea that I have to get the thoughts right. If the knowing nature of being isn't thinking, and I begin to conceive, just as you described, Lex, it's beyond, it's not in parts and pieces. It isn't even one. It can't even be one because one is within the numerical system. It's an essence that's indescribable in those terms, which in one rational sense, it makes it seem impossible. But in the other sense, you begin to see that if it were defined rationally, it wouldn't be described absolutely. The actual essence of it is the incomprehensibility of it and the absolute seeming irrationality of it. When in fact the irrational thinking process is thinking I need to conclude it within thinking first, rather than concede it as an absolute part, not an absolute part, but an absolute nature for all of us that we all have and everything has and always has had. And it's that subatomic thing that seems to be so invisible and hard for humans to discover. It must be that too in all of its seeming variations or seeming distinctions, and yet at the same time in its absolute unified whole to allow this universe to even be happening. And in this discussion, the universe starts to become very, very small. As a matter of fact, it probably can't even exist within an infinite state because there are no parts and pieces. So all of this is somewhat like a grand illusion that they have been It has been talked about for centuries and thousands of years by different levels of people considering spirituality. So if the concession is that it just is as it is, and I don't need to be the definer of it, and my words don't need to be the vocabulary to it, or from it or of it, and I can start noticing that I have that awareness, the I I'm speaking from, the I am talking to myself, is actually the one we all share, we all know, in absolute terms, not in subjective terms based on how I think about it, but in absolute terms based on how we all know it. And that's the knowing nature of our existence. We have been plotting through human history to come up with a conclusive nature within a rational structure, which actually defines us as separate from it. And we have used those terms very accurately, thinking God is in heaven and we are on earth, and then there's a hell that's in some other place. It's always some other place, but here. It's been displaced. If something's infinite, it can't be displaced. It can't be somewhere else if it isn't here. And it's interesting that if it's where everything and everyone is, then it's already and always been exactly where we have always been. And the discord in thinking, putting it out of order, is thinking is the primary sole source of getting to it, when in fact thinking we need to get to it is admission invisibly that we are maintaining an idea that we are separate from it and that it is not here. And we are the producers of it. We are the creators of it, which is exactly what describes ego in its modern form. We become gods individually, thinking we're the creators of reality. We've made our bodies. We are what we do. So we become a baker if we happen to bake. And we become a bike rider if we ride a bike. We don't become those things. We do those things. Just like we think is a doing. It isn't who we are. It's simply something we do because we have bodies. We utilize those bodies. How well we utilize them is based on how well we function and how well we use this guidance system that you described very, very well. I hope the recording was on when that started. You described it very well in terms of the feelings you were having about what was going on in your inner relationships, interpersonal relations, and other situations. I learned when I started listening to those words as things that were actually accurate, that it was starting to tell me what I was doing in my thinking that was wrong. It wasn't the circumstance, it wasn't the person, it wasn't all that stuff out there I was using to think was complicated. It was the complication I was applying in my own thinking that was causing those projections, literally a narrative that I was projecting out on other people because I was trying to act irresponsible for what I was doing. So most of what's driving us, my experience with all the people I've ever worked with, is that it's what we think we're not doing that's really driving the train of what's happening. And as a result, we think because we think we're not doing it, we have nothing to do with it, and then think of it in this sort of discordant, disconnected sense, rather than as something immediately being manifest by our own choices. And they're accurate manifestations of those choices. They're in perfect order all the time, regardless of how we think of them. So that's sort of the big oily bag.
What are you really trying to say, Les?
I thought I did say it. And as Jack accurately describes, there's a limitation in language, and that's often. I find that there actually might be a connection between a knowing essence and my feelings as compared to my thinking and my feelings. And so when I feel disturbed, it's probably because I'm relying more on my feelings being connected to my thinking as my feelings being connected to my knowing essence.
Bingo.
Yeah, well, think of meditation too. If if that absolute nature is our absolute nature and it doesn't change, when we're talking about the absolute, the one distinction is that it doesn't change. It's just absolute. There's nothing in it to change. There's no process. There's no bits, no pieces, nothing. There's no interaction. It's just a present state of being. If that is in fact our nature, that is what we seem to find when we stop to meditate. We get quiet for a minute and notice, oh, this thing always seems to be there whenever I pay attention to it. And my contention, if it's contentious at all, but just as a presentation in terms of thought, is that that's our natural state, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always. And the clarity that you're describing, Les, in the wrongs that you're seeing, is that that clarity of something that doesn't change is perfectly still, perfectly at peace, and perfectly silent. So any clamor, any ripple is coming from our choices in our thinking, how we're thinking, and what we're thinking that's causing it. It isn't causing it, it isn't forcing us, it's giving us the free will to choose what we want and make believe that those choices are reality if we want to, and then wonder why we seem to suffer with reality as a result. That's how free we are. And we each have, that's the one thing we seem to have to control is the thoughts we have and how we utilize them. As you described, perception. So the words will always fail us.
But when it comes in, I'm sorry, but when it comes in the, okay, so that's fine as I sit by myself, and I think and I meditate, or I try to recognize my part of being in the whole whatever, where it seems to, I won't say run awry, but have this issue is that, wait a minute, just like right now we're having a conversation or an interaction, and yet you are part of the absolute reality and essence, then why is it that the actions, inactions, words of others, which frankly seem either harmful, hurtful, disinterested, disingenuous, whatever, why is that considered okay as part of the absolute reality? And why should I, in my perception as a living physical being, not be disturbed?
The same reason why when you run out of washer fluid in your car, the light goes on and tells you you have no more washer fluid in your car, window washer. Just an indicator. It's an accurate dashboard illuminating through alarms and bells and whistles the actuality of what we're thinking in relation to what's actually happened. And my sense is, Les, this whole idea we have about self, it's all self-propelled, self-induced, self-imposed. It's simply thinking about thinking itself that we have mistaken for being ourself. And as a result, we think all we are is what we think. So we're acutely sensitive to anyone who thinks or does anything we don't expect them to do or want. Because we've weaponized literally thinking to become this dominion where anybody who crosses our path and doesn't go along with us is somehow or another attacking us and somehow or another hurting us. I don't suspect we can hurt each other's feelings. I suspect people help illuminate the feelings that are hurt in each of us. And it's actual advantage to have that happen because they're giving us a chance to look at something we're obviously disinterested in. And start to notice how turning it around actually shows the absolute nature's been working the whole time. We've been thinking about it backward. We've been thinking of thinking being primary rather than the source of the source being the essence being primary to our knowingness, not our thinking. Think of mind as something distinct from the brain, but it's exactly what the brain is designed to express.
Or whatever you focus on is what you get. I have an apology to Les and everybody that was at the last meeting. I was so worried somebody was going to take something from me that sure enough, it was gone. When it wasn't gone, I found it in my briefcase and I was so embarrassed. I swear I looked 5 times and it wasn't there. And then after the meeting, sometime after I found it. So all that was for nothing, that whole complaining and whining. But maybe that's the point of it, that I was so concerned about that. I was focusing on that. And sure enough, that's what happened in my mind, but not in reality.
But in your thinking, you thought it was lost. So when you looked in that briefcase 5 times, you didn't see it.
Either that, I really believe in the supernatural because I know I looked at 5 times. I mean, I don't know. I can't explain it.
Listen to my point.
Yeah.
When we make believe something's true, when we look out into the world, we don't see all the evidence that
Yeah.
tells us otherwise. We're
Yeah.
actually to ignore it. The book talks about it as these strange mental blind spots. It's not strange that we pretend that what we're seeing isn't what we're seeing and what we're hearing isn't what we're hearing, because when we're acting from obsessive thinking, all we're hearing is what we think is being said, and all we're seeing is what we think is being seen, which always tailors to supporting the contention that it's the way we want it and it's the way it should be. And if it isn't that way, we are hell-bent to try to
Yes,
figure out how to
exactly.
and demand everyone else. That little bit of a metaphor is perfect for this idea that we actually are struggling with things that we are doing that we don't even think we're doing. And to begin to conceive that in words is very interesting, because it begins to open the possibility up to the things we've been thinking as being exactly the opposite of what's actually happening. That's exactly what a lie is. A lie is attempting to turn something that isn't true into truth, or something that is true into non-truth.
The sad part is I was so devastated. I mean, I really was devastated that I let my guard down, and it was for nothing. It helped in the long run because I cleaned like I've never cleaned before because I was looking for something. But it really is sad that I was so depressed for nothing.
Well, let me tell you, that sadness did not start with that watch. It has been going on for as long as you've been operating on this basis. And my sense is that the grief and the mourning and the loss that we've all witnessed is the present traumatic stress that we're constantly trying to assign to some other time and place and fix it from there as though it isn't happening here. When in fact, this is the only place anything right now is happening. And just like always now for humans, now and here for humans is that present state. In that present state, there is no now or here because there is no there or then. It's just an absolute present state that's beyond the comprehension of everything. We even talk about it. You use the word everything, Les. When it comes to this, you're talking about everything and nothing. and realizing that all of a sudden nothing becomes something. And realizing that in physics now. The darkness that they thought was space and empty is actually more matter than all the matter that was in the space they thought it was occupied.
I think the way you described it is that oftentimes Anthony is disturbed because he thinks nothing is everything. And when he finally realizes that the nothing is nothing, he recognizes why was he disturbed.
Yes. That's a lot of truth there too, that all this time and everything building up who I am for who? For just for me almost. Like who really cares?
See the beauty in what Les just said here. If it isn't the circumstance that's difficult is giving us a chance to see the absolute nature of that thinking, that disconnected, discordant, malign thinking. It's giving us a chance to say, wow, I have been missing in my own thinking the moment. I haven't been missing it. I haven't been not present. I've simply been missing the moment by preoccupying myself with things that aren't happening as though they're everything that's happening.
Yeah.
And
well, also too, just real quick, I remember when I was looking for something, I thought my life was over, so to speak. And I remember how my brain said, God, what if everything you did in your life was just right? And think about where you would be today if you never made a mistake. So that it was like, I heard that. I'm like, wow, that was coming from somewhere else. But that's where it took me to, like something incredibly unfathomable.
Yeah, well, you fathomed it.
What?
You actually fathomed it. You actually rocked that. Now, let me suggest that's your knowing nature beginning to come to terms with your awareness as being present, because it begins to all of a sudden, feeling overwhelmed is simply exceeding the bounds of the limited ideas we've chosen to make believe.
Yes.
And to begin to see that freely is to start to say, oh, I've always had an observatory, I've always been the observer of all of this. I've always had a knowing nature in relation to all of this. I have just been simply making believe I'm in my thoughts by making believe I am my thoughts, and then lose all perspective and all essence, because now everything is limited and everything is chaotic and everything is random and everything is opposed to everything else, and wonder why our attention hasn't been in thinking.
Why our attention, and what did you just, this is important, but wondering why our attention hasn't been in thinking, is that what you said?
Well, the point is, as it becomes clear that we have a knowing awareness and we are that knowing awareness, that is actually our essence. That is the thing that people seem to realize in near-death experiences, that becomes this profound awareness only when they're finally facing death, because we make believe the thing we're doing is in fact the life that we're leading. It isn't. So the question I had, and I asked my own experience, I asked my own process, what is it that I'm still maintaining? Or I don't even ask what. Very often I just suggest that I am maintaining ideas and belief systems that are not true right now. And they give me an experience of feeling threatened as a result, because literally, if I am not paying attention to what's happening, feeling threatened is the natural response.
Yes.
I don't even see the tiger coming. I think that I think it's a movie. Well, in fact, the movie I'm projecting, I'm believing is reality.
Yes.
Completely transmuting everything that's going on. So to see that, Anthony, in that broad sense, in a moment like you did, that's how you begin to realize that
it's amazing.
Awareness is never missing. And yet the longing we have and the missing we do is all contained in the idea that all we are is what we think. And that should be a very lonely place that creates ideas about being missed, not belonging, another very popular contention. I don't feel like I belong. Well, to feel that I'm my thoughts, I don't belong in my thoughts. I have no place in my thoughts. That is not who I am.
Or what if we take a look at it? What if we answer the question, like, where, okay, let's go with that. Where would I be? Like, what is the ultimate
exactly
Buddha?
Where you are.
Right. Yeah. Maybe with a little bit more money, though, and better looks. But other than that,
In one sense, Anthony, all of the absolute knowing nature is perfect, because it doesn't, think of that perfect thing I described in terms of the absolute essence. It doesn't change. It doesn't, there's no parts and pieces to compare. So you can't have more or less in an element or a dimension or an
Can
essence.
parts of it be perfect and other parts not perfect?
Then it would all be imperfect. You know what happens to a lens on those telescopes when it gets a speck of dust on it? They are useless. So think about seeing that way.
Yeah, but you could be just speculating.
So
No pun intended.
If we're seeing from a point of view that's contaminated, we're going to see contamination everywhere we look. It doesn't mean there isn't contamination where we look.
Maybe that is where they get the word speculate. Speculate. That spec just screws everything up. Hey, is there something different with your mic today too, Jack? I noticed you're not wearing your headset, and it sounds more tinny, reverbery.
I did not charge them.
In a perfect world, they would charge themselves, right? There's our Jack. For our listeners at home that aren't seeing, Jack just put on the cool headset. Let's see how it sounds. Over here. Are you muting me? So I do want to apologize. So I'm sorry for talking about 25 minutes about something that wasn't even true.
Well, right now, Anthony, you have a very good ability to diverge from what's happening in the present and sort of loop back around these little stories.
That's good, right? People like that.
I don't know what people like and don't like. That's up to them. But what I know, I know what we're here for.
What are we here for? Remind me, because sometimes I forget.
What we're here for is to focus and begin to eliminate those sideshows and those distractions that are not attractive and do not promote our health. They maintain those obsessive ideas that somehow or another playing games and pulling people
How
away
about
from.
this? How about, let me ask you a question, because that's hurting my feelings a little bit. But what if it's not to focus? See, my problem is the reason I'm here is because I focus too. I want to let go. I don't need to care about that and focus on. When that was my problem. I think I focused on you, focused on everything. Don't focus. Relax. It's happening. Let it happen. I don't have
So
to make.
play that out, Anthony. You've got
I have been. It seems to
you've
be
got
working.
166 hours a week that you're not here. But the purpose of being here is to begin to notice, whether you focus on it or not is your choice, to notice the impulsive, reactive tendencies to be distracted from that absolute present knowing awareness that's always here now, always shared by all of us, always aware. We're always aware of it. Now, if what I'm doing is trying to keep people from having that experience by being busy by being busy reactively and
You're trying to tell
obsessively.
me you don't like me. I'll just go on mute then. I apologize. I thought I was making it more. I look at it as like, God, this show would be boring without me. But I guess that's the other side of it.
Please tell me you're kidding, Anthony. Please.
Well, not really. I mean,
Well,
I,
then your self-centeredness is getting in the way of the progress that we try to make each week when
right.
we
I'll
focus.
accept that.
Well, then shut the hell up unless you can separate your self-centeredness from
Okay.
trying to
Well,
progress.
if coming
I
from
mean,
you, I
I've been
appreciate
listening
that.
to you for years. I think you know it. I think you enjoy the
I do.
attention.
Of course. I'm not going to say I don't. No, I don't enjoy
Yes,
it.
yeah, but there's a difference. Okay, so this is
I don't
that
want to make you
old.
mad. Let's not argue
No,
on
no,
the air.
I'm
I
not. No,
understand
no,
what you're saying.
you don't understand. No, I'm not mad. You misinterpret my feelings and my sentiments and my thoughts. Here's what I'm trying to say, and tell me if this makes sense. Oftentimes we hear, "Hey, a person likes to be considered have attention and have people think that he or she is funny." But there's a difference laughing with someone and laughing at someone. What I'm sensing here is that you enjoy the prospect and you enjoy the discourse and, frankly, the interruption of when Jack is attempting to help us to look at, focus, and perceive things completely different than what we often do, and how easy it is to fall back into what I'll call it either old thinking or whatever, that you seem to drive some pleasure into continuing to focus on or bring up that which is obviously not relevant, trivial, or doesn't continue to focus the hopefully expansion, understanding, acceptance, knowledge, whatever of the absolute reality. And if I were doing this, if this were a class, if this were some seminar, I would like to see, I would hope that I'm making progress as compared to rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And hopefully that, so am I upset with you? No. Do I think that you actually maybe get some of this? Yes. But I also perceive, and again, as soon as that word is perceived, so I could easily be wrong, Anthony, that you're doing it more for attention than growth. And that in and of itself may help, limit one's development. And by the way, if I feel that's what I think, then I have part of that in me too. So this is not exclusive to you. I'm probably seeing a part of me as well.
Well, and certainly by expressing it less, you're taking part in a form of communication that is doing something in the nature of beginning to eliminate or start to notice the reactivity that comes from the obsessive thinking. And one of those ideas, Anthony, is that we can hurt other people's feelings or that I can make somebody mad. If somebody's angry and I do something that allows them to access that anger, in the same way we don't think we're doing what we're doing, we have this stored up, pent up energy in us to any degree we're denying what's happening that is creating a charge like a volcano that's getting ready to erupt. And eventually we erupt. And some of those eruptions, as you described, is the looking for something you think is missing that isn't missing.
Yeah,
And
and
it
I,
is,
I just want to
it,
apologize. So I really honestly didn't know Les felt that way. I thought in my own mind that some people don't like to go to this meeting because it's only what Jack thinks. And I hear Les saying, I just want to hear what Jack thinks. I thought the difference between a cult and a kind of a discussion is like where other people put in their ideas. So, but you haven't told me that, Les, or I would understand, and I won't do that anymore. I really feel bad.
No, no.
So,
well,
Well, I can't, Anthony. I'm not trying. Certainly, that wasn't my intent. And frankly, don't want to only hear Jack because when Jack talks, I can. It takes me a while to absorb maybe 3 words he says, and then when he says 100 words, I enjoy the discuss. That's what a discussion is. But what I perceive that this discussion is, Jack's got this connection, understanding, belief, whatever, and I'm trying to get to be closer to that. And as I progress, just like a teacher has a knowledge and a student gets it bit by bit by bit, and frankly brings in my whatever goes on during the course of time of my week that may or may not jive with how I'm thinking. That's what the discussion is. It's not a question. Jack says it all the time. It's not right or wrong. It's just a question of whether or not I'm focusing and actually trying to grow, evolve, connect, advance, whatever words you like to use, as compared to, hey, let's just get around and have coffee and chit chat. So no, please don't. You are not a problem. I'm not upset. Maybe my desire, maybe what I'm attempting to seek in coming to this type of discussion is different than what I do for other
yeah.
spiritual type connections and
And
meditations.
I got to look at
whatever.
myself. Why is it so important? Like I feel hurt because I'm not impressing Les or like what the hell? Why? Like it's so important to me that you're impressed and going, wow, I really like.
but
Anthony,
let's go back a minute to the situation with the watch and that little epiphany you had.
yeah. Why little? I don't like the word little. It was huge.
Les is now the Rolex watch that you're using to claim you wish he wasn't doing what he was doing so you could feel better, when in fact he's just he's another pinprick in the balloon that can give you the chance to say, oh, I'm actually, this obsessive thinking we think is who we are. We think our life is dependent on it. I guarantee you, you have been grieving and anxious and angry and sad and mourning a sense of loss as long as you've been maintaining it. Because you can't trade everything in for nothing and not have an impact on your experience.
Wait, say that again. You can't trade everything in for nothing. How do you do that? How do you trade everything?
By making believe all you are is what you think. All of a sudden your reality becomes only what you think, and that means reality has no existence anymore.
Right. Or you'll say, oh, I'll prove them wrong. I used to say that a lot. I'll show them I'm right.
The point here is to begin to notice the reactivity. I'm upset, Anthony, but I'm upset because I look at a whole world that has been operating on this basis that has caused almost immeasurable harm and continues today. Things are out there that are disturbing to be looked at accurately. And if I am not disturbed looking at them accurately, I am pathologically avoiding and denying and lying about what is actually happening.
Yeah.
But if that little speck of my own thinking becomes all I think I am, then everything I'm seeing is only going to be tailored to how I think it is, when in fact that's exactly the thinking that's causing the wrong out there that I'm trying to avoid and deny because it's too much for me to bear. Because the bearing of it would be the admission that this other seeming self I have has no basis whatsoever other than what I think. And it doesn't mean I can't think what I think about my thinking. And I can call it myself all I want, but it isn't who I am. It's something I'm doing, any more than I become a painting on a wall or a projection of thought in literature. I become the character. No characters in a movie ever die when the movie's over. But this isn't, to me, this is a life and death. And I don't mean life and death in reality, because there is no death in reality if it's infinite. But for the human experience, this has become an incredibly dramatic process of retribution and vengefulness and hatred and spite and contempt against other humans simply for what they're thinking. It's been going on so long that it sickens me to have so little influence, to be able to say so little that could mean anything in relation to this. But it isn't my job to do that. It's all of our jobs to begin to look at that we are all collectively participating in this. To any degree we're doing what we're doing, that impact is being witnessed by us all the time. And to me, that's worth talking about. It's worth mentioning.
That's what we're here for.
Well, the essence of this is to discuss openly what we're doing. And if I find myself feeling somebody else is causing me to feel things, I am acting as though all I am is an effect and I have nothing to do with anything. That's an addictive tendency, because as soon as I think I have nothing to do with anything, I think I can't do anything about it. And the next thought is the only thing I can do is to just keep marching on in the exact same way. It's exactly what addiction is. And this mental addiction, the craving of the body, keep in mind, the brain is in the body. The craving is the mental obsession. The ego is the mental obsession by today's use of terms. It's a lie parading and masquerading as reality. It isn't, it won't be, it can't be. And no wonder we feel like hell and feel exhausted trying to maintain something that's absolutely impossible. Reality is already real. It doesn't need our input. It doesn't need us to fill a gap or a canyon somewhere. There is no gap. There is no distance. To begin to see this, like Les, I think you had a little shift in terms of the definition, in terms of the absolute, is to begin to see that absolute means absolute. It means absolutely no exceptions, no negotiation whatsoever. None, none, none. I can't do anything to get there. To think I need to get there is to also admit right now I don't think I am there, and it is not here. And that's a major flaw in thinking. Thanks for the grapefruit.
The home listeners are not going to understand that.
So,
Thanks for the grapefruit. But also, too, I do like to have it a little bit of coffee time. I admit that. And then I'm going to go on mute because I'm not going to talk anymore. But I do like to lighten it up a little bit.
Anthony, there is absolutely no weight whatsoever in what we're discussing. It's only what you're thinking about it that weighs. That's it. There is no opposition. There is no conflict. There is nothing, absolutely nothing. Light. Think of light as being light.
Yeah.
The nature of brilliance is light. The nature of enlightenment is light. The nature of radiance is light. The nature of brightness is light. All of these things are what is expressed metaphorically in that absolute white light, that pure, unadulterated, shadowless, absolute state of being. Now, that may be a physical metaphor for it, but if it is, it's a very good one, because there certainly is no weight in light. Light doesn't clash with itself. You don't have light beams out there trying to knock the other light beam off. They just share the space. Even within the physical universe, you can see this unity of occurrence happening. Everything that's happening right now, to Les's point earlier about others, everything that's happening is happening exactly as it's happening. Whether we think it should or shouldn't be is a choice we make. Whether we think it's right or wrong is a choice we make. But I would also say, Les, to your right or wrong, when it comes to humans, our healthy capacity is the difference between survival and thriving, and not surviving and not thriving. Survival depends on right decisions. If I don't get the food to my mouth, I'm going to starve. If I think it belongs in my ear, I'm not going to hear very well, and I'm not going to feel very well very quickly. If I think I don't need water, I'm going to dehydrate. There are the right things to do. And to have a preoccupation with mental obsession as being all I am, I start doing those things backward. Look at the condition of our humanity today, the diseases that have been caused, obesity and diabetes, and this insanity that's going on, overdoses and all that kind of stuff. These are all byproducts of this thinking running rampant, and thinking there's nothing we can do about it and it's natural. So what we need are more drugs to treat it. They're talking about this reduction in the overdose rate, is finally being solved. What they created was a new drug to give drug addicts so they could keep from overdosing. So it's another layer upon a layer upon a layer trying to fix a problem by causing the problem and not actually centering the focus on the problem. And the mental problem, when we feel disturbed, we want to feel better because we think there's no hope and there's nothing else to us than that. And that has been an over or underarching, I would say, common denominator throughout history, that people are always trying to get more, always trying to feel better. That has been historically the goal. Nature does not do that. The ocean does not just say, you know what, I need to grow. Trees do not just decide to eat all the food in the forest or drink all the water. They take what they need. That's it. Nature has a proper balance. So do we. We're nature. We're products of nature physically. And if that nature means a God that created us, then so be it. And if it means some succession of organisms changing and interacting, so be it. It may be both. It may be neither. It doesn't matter. What matters is that whatever it is as it is right now. That's what matters in terms of human concern. If it's something else, it's something else. If I'm flexible enough to notice whatever it is, I'm flexible enough now to notice I don't have to do much more thinking about it than that. So I can actually begin to apply my thinking, Anthony, in directions that I may really enjoy and appreciate, because I will do appreciable things that are enjoyable rather than try to constantly feel better about stuff that I don't feel good about and pretend that getting over it's the goal. That presumption that everything is wrong is the maintenance of this obsessive thinking, chronically being overlooked as the source of the problem. We've been treating the effects for thousands of years rather than the source. Effects don't exist without a cause.
Jack, can you give another example of, besides treating drugs with other drugs, another way in society that we treat things not with the real solving the problem, but with something else?
Blaming others,
Okay.
faulting, not forgiving them when it's what we're thinking that's causing the lack of forgiveness. If I'm having things as they are, I don't have any lack of forgiveness because I'm forgiving things what they are, how they are, where they are, when they are, as they are. If I'm thinking of you as wrong, and listen, I have people in my life that have done things that really still bother me that I have not forgiven in these same terms. So I'm not talking about not doing this. I'm talking about being open about what I do so I can begin to see that the byproducts that I get, the weight that I bear, is actually being caused by my own thinking rather than thinking of it as something they did and they need to correct it and I got to get them straight. And until they listen to my story and agree with it, they're going to be assholes in some way.
Is that
It's
Anthony that you?
never never the case. It's never going to be fixed out there if I'm unwilling to fix what I'm doing. So I would say anything that's reversed, anything that's reversed, caustic, conflicted, is all doing just that. It's trying to be irresponsible. We think we can be irresponsible. We can act irresponsibly, but we're absolutely responsible for everything we do. So when we think somebody else becomes irresponsible, the same way we think the baker becomes a baker because they bake, when somebody acts irresponsible, we call them irresponsible. They are not irresponsible. They're acting irresponsibly. That's a choice. They're absolute. The state of being of responsibility is not a choice. It's just the nature of nature. It's like trees. And, if you look at nature, everything seems to know exactly what it's doing. And that's what its responsibility is. We're the only ones that choose to believe we don't have anything to do with things and then wonder why things keep getting worse. We're not acting responsibly in relation to the responsibility that we have. And yet even the irresponsibility we're responsible for, which is exactly what the law is designed to try to correct. People haven't been taking responsibility for their actions. And so someone needs to apparently do that for them. Because we think of it as something we need to hide, we're getting away with it, we're hiding it. We're not hiding it at all. It's in blatant full view. All of the conditions that are being experienced right now are the sum total of all of those actions, defective and stagnant and poison, toxic, etc. Another thing in that same line, if you want more of an answer, Jackie, is that if the baseline of my thinking is obsessive in any way, and I'm suggesting that even having the awareness that I think obsessively doesn't mean I no longer think obsessive. I can say I don't and still be doing it, right?
Right.
So it's easy to say because I'm not doing it like I did last year, I'm no longer doing it. But the chances are if I did it last year and the year before and the year before that and the year before that, there were probably things I was acting on then that I never came to terms with. So I'm still acting on them, making believe that because I'm not doing what was most obvious means that the things I'm oblivious to, I'm no longer doing. You follow that?
Yes.
So if I'm still acting that way, then my understanding of life has become misunderstanding. And this is exactly that same reversal. So all of a sudden, when I say I understand something, I'm actually admitting I misunderstand that thing. And when I think I'm doing something healthy, Bill says this in the 6th step, I believe in the 12 and 12. He says there are some things we don't want to let go of because we love them too much. Interesting that we would love things that are killing us, literally. Any compulsion is not attached to anything that's healthy. And so we use love, the name of love in vain, to justify continuing to do the thing that's killing us. So we think it's healthy, we think it's okay because it solves that. It gives me something to be distracted by in a physical way, in a chemical in some way. And they're all inducing chemical reactions in our body, by the way. So substance abuse in terms of chemical substance is happening in our bodies, regardless of whether we're ingesting chemicals. We're the manufacturers of chemicals. Our whole body is working on a chemical system. Adrenaline is probably the primary thing. That is designed to help us in flight situations, and we've created those emergencies 24 hours a day, trying to come to terms with a self that doesn't exist, and we know there's an emergency. We know the emergency is on because of the anxiety and the stress that we have. And it's exactly what adrenaline's trying to overcome while it's creating it within the context of this thinking that we're doing. We become the enemy, and we become the protector against the enemy simultaneously. The thesis and the antithesis. We're for and against the same thing simultaneously, internally. And wondering why we're not functioning well, or producing as much, or having the things we think we want. When in fact, if we're sick in our thinking, we're getting everything we want. We just don't want to admit we're that sick to want them. So it all reverses. Now, does it really? No. Only in our mentality is it reversed, not reality. And my experience, and that of as many people as I've worked with, is that if that's looked at, the clarity of the fact that we know better is exactly what gives us the platform, the basis to see what's wrong, to recognize what's wrong, and to speak of it in those terms. But normally what we say, we think about the situations as wrong, the circumstances as wrong, rather than those situations and circumstances be manifestations of the wrong we're thinking. Just like Anthony talked about looking for the watch, he swears he looked in there 5 times. I've done that many times looking for my glasses. I'm so sure they're lost, I'll look right at them and not see them. If we can induce this blindness on a small level, certainly socially, we could do the same thing and act as though we're doing the right thing, while in fact, we're doing the wrong thing, perpetually over and over and over again. And I would say we've gotten really good at that, Anthony, in terms of trying to get better. Sometimes the better we're trying to get is getting better at feeling nothing about what we're doing that's worse. That isn't getting better. That's actually helping to cultivate insanity. And I would say if our feelings are hurt because of something someone else says, the root of those feelings have been hurting for a long time, waiting for an excuse to finally be admitted. But you see, the excuse becomes blame rather than a simple admission that, wow, I've been hurting, I've been mourning, I've been grieving. And it's not all the people and circumstances, it's my own experience that's been grieving, that I've been causing.
Why do we think it's fun to blame other people instead of taking ownership?
You know, it's the same twisted logic that if I have nothing to do with something, it must mean everybody else is responsible but me. And what's interesting in that is that you can, if you look at that clearly, we clearly are aware that there's a responsibility at hand, right?
Right.
But it's so easy to pretend it's not us because we haven't been looking at this experience that we're creating internally as being the thing that's causing all the things that seem so obvious externally. We haven't stopped to say, wait a minute, if I didn't exist, this thought occurred to me and it kind of blew the door off the car a little bit. So I was driving a Jeep for a while. If I didn't exist, none of it would matter. None of it. And the fact that I exist, all of it matters in some respect. I must be part of all those things in my human experience. I must be a part of them all and also the essence of everything at the same time, shared with everyone. And it's not even shared, it's just an absolute essence. I don't need to share it as though it can't be unshared. Because when you're dealing in absolute things like principles and reality and truth, they just are as they are. They don't even need words attached to them to be as they are, because they certainly existed well before words were even invented. Our language was only invented when humans showed up. We've lived here a speck of the time that this universe has, apparently anyhow, unless the universe had some trick with time, which it could well have, not a trick, but maybe some form of creating what appears to be a long time in a very short period of time. But it seems convenient because it's inconvenient. The same thing of this understanding. When we think understanding is misunderstanding, we start doing things that make no sense. And I would say, in terms of right and wrong, these are the wrong things because they're actually pleading. They're suicidal tendencies. They're pleading for death. They're pleading for the death of this self that we think is us, and don't see that it's simply something we're doing within our choosing of how and what we're thinking. So people kill their bodies to stop the thinking. That must be a pretty desperate position to be in to do that and not notice that it's just a choice they're making within the context of other choices they've made and other belief systems that we've maintained collectively that we think would be absurd to consider aren't real or true. Patriotism and loyalty and all this kind of stuff. Nobody needs allegiance if somebody is absolutely based in something that's absolutely already unifying. You can't be unallegiant to that. All those things are crusades within the context of thought. The idea that this mental condition is an addiction, Bill pointed out, it's given very, very little airplay within the confines of sobriety in all the various forms of symptomatic addiction. We talk about it, but I don't think we've talked about it honestly. I don't think we've yet talked about it honestly. And I'm sure that people have, but within my circles, I don't hear it enough to want to be quiet about it. There's something else that I sent in the announcement that was super well written by some guy in New Jersey about the spiritual malady. And he makes a lot of the points. I think there's some missing in that are worth noting, but it's interesting to look at the spiritual. He calls it the missing link. We know about the allergy, we know about the craving, the physical things, but what's missed is we talk about the mind, we're really referring to the brain. Bill says it centers in the mind. Disease doesn't center in an absolute knowing mind, because there is no dis-ease in that. There is no discomfort in that. There is no conflict in that. There is no possibility of that. It's what we call the mind, the brain. And guess what? The brain is in the body. What's the allergy to alcohol? A physical craving. What's the brain doing? Craving the next thought. Craving. That's the allergy. Lying is the allergy of the brain. Can't process insanity. Lying is insane to make believe it'll someday be true. And to make believe that keeping it a secret is somehow going to get us somewhere. The idea that we're not where we are would mean that we should be somewhere else, like Anthony was referencing. But if the only place we're ever in is where we are, we're already there. That's over. Done. Never needs to be talked about again. It will always be that way. Absolute reality does not change. It doesn't change for us any more than what we think about it and create an experience that we begin to believe is reality. It isn't reality. We're just creating an experience that we become consumed by and intoxicated by because of all the chemicals that are capable of being produced in our body. So I would suggest instinct is our physical metaphor for intuition, spiritual intuition, knowledge beyond reason, because instinct does not operate on rational terms. It doesn't operate within reason. It's just a knowing to do something when a threat appears. It's a knowing awareness of what to do, and pretty much those things are defined as fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I think there's one more in there. But those are natural, immediate, not thinking processes. They're built into our body. That's a metaphor for this spiritual intuition, this absolute knowing, the present knowing that we have. It's being expressed in the body because the body is a product of reality, not the creator of reality. And interestingly, adrenaline, one of the primary, which is, what do they call it?
Cortisol?
Epinephrine.
Oh.
So it's created, I'm going to give you a definition, describes physiological symptoms, increased heart rate and respiration that occur as part of the body's fight or flight response to stress, as when someone is in danger, frightening, or highly competitive situations. So we're inducing chemical reactions by creating an emergency in our own system, literally an emergency, because we have emerged as reality in our thinking. We create an emergency in relation to the healthy choices we're going to make because we're making them all backward. We're doing all the wrong things, thinking someday they'll be right. That's exactly what a lie is. And what happens? We use up all our adrenaline, something that's in store for us to deal with actual situations that are threatening. And we're using it all day long and wondering why our body is depleted of things it needs when we need it. We're using it for something just like in a dream. Dreams feel real. They're still dreams, but we elicit an experience that would also increase our heart rate. If you've ever woken up from a nightmare, your heart rate is generally racing. It's as though it's actually happening. Because we've been relying on our imagination as reality, we think of dreams as something that are happening to us, not being caused by us, not being an expression, a resting expression of our brain mental activity. We've been acting irresponsible so long, we think it's responsibility. We think it's the only responsible thing to do, but continue to cultivate new ideas to feel better about something that isn't better. It's wrong. It's bad. It's not healthy. So health in those terms is unhealthy. And safety is a risk. It's all backward. Understanding's misunderstanding. We say that alcoholism is a disease of perception. It's actually a disease of misperception. But we've been seeing things incorrectly, so we call it perception, when in fact it's misperception that we've been seeing. It's not the alcohol. It's not the drugs. The substance abuse is the lack of substance in any lie, parading and masquerading as reality. All reality has substance, and all reality that exists is completely unseen to us. All of these forms that we have are all products of that reality. They're all byproducts of it. They are not the creator of reality. So Bill said, there will be some things, some big chunks to swallow. And this is sort of like the big gulp at 7-Eleven. It's a lot if you're thinking in terms of thinking and thinking you need to figure it out. But if you begin to notice that your knowledge isn't based in thinking, and your mind, our mind, the one we share, the absolute nature of reality and truth and life and light and love and whatever would be principled and moral in the most ultimate way, most generous, giving, loving, blissful way, does not require my thinking at all. My thinking is a product of it. And when I begin to conceive that, begin to notice that that is the state of my present state now, the thinking starts to fall apart very quickly. And the insight, just like Anthony described the insight he had in that little moment of finding the thing and seeing how far off the course he'd gone, trying to think it was going to be there when he kept looking and avoided seeing it, and saw some panoramic view. That knowing awareness, Anthony, everyone, is the nature of our nature. We know it all the time. We're acting like we don't so we can dumb down and desensitize our experience and make believe that all we are is a succession of stupid ideas and wonder why we keep feeling stupid and apart from and unintelligible. Insanity is unintelligible. It's not going to be intelligent at some point. Can have all the parades you want. It's a masquerade. It's an imposition. It's an imposter in terms of a actual, real essence. Just a thought, imagined, considered to be reality, an illusion as reality. Fantasy as reality would be pretty clearly a problem. And yet that's exactly what we're doing with our thinking about our thinking itself when we make believe it's ourself and all that we are and all that we can be. And what we need to do is think more about it to constantly manage the problem that is out of control because it has absolutely no control whatsoever in it. There is no control in insanity. To try to control insanity is insane. To try to talk reason to someone who's unreasonable is unreasonable, which is part of the issue that comes up here. It's not easy to have a conversation that is frank about our natural state of being and awareness, because it runs head on into all of those reactive thoughts, defending, what is only possibly vulnerable, weak, and completely without merit or basis whatsoever. A lie has no basis. It has no substance. It's all numerator trying to have a denominator, and it never will, never can, won't be. But we can think it does. We can think it will. And that's where the experiences we have start. Feeling alone is feeling a thought that has no basis. It is so alone, it doesn't even exist. To think we're afraid of our ego dying is to think that it's ever lived. It hasn't. It doesn't. It has no basis other than fantasy. And fantasy wouldn't be fantasy if it were reality. There wouldn't be a word for it.
In movies, they always have to have a conflict.
Right.
But I always think it would be nice to have a movie that there isn't a conflict.
Well, my sense is this sort of narrative that we develop, Jackie, is based on that, and movies are really offering us a distraction so that we can see the inner conflict on the exterior and have it resolved. We're constantly trying to resolve it, and most movies end on a high note. Not all of them, but the ones that don't are often criticized for not, kind of coming to the rescue at the last minute. So we do a lot of things metaphorically to feel better about what we're doing, while in fact we're getting better at getting worse. And that, I would say, is a perfect description of insanity and addiction. And addiction is insanity because it has no basis other than thinking. It's just an illusion imagined to be real, and a thought that is wrong imagined to be right. A thought that's wrong is wrong because it's wrong. Wrong is right. Wrong is right is wrong. Even in mathematics, the Plus times a minus always ends up a minus. Minus times a plus always ends up a minus. Plus times a plus is always positive, and minus times a minus is always positive. Why? Because they're positing the same thing. Wrong is right, because at least we're assessing it accurately. It doesn't mean the thought is right. It means our assessment of that thought is right. We think we're in our thought, so we think the thought has to be right for us to be right. If it's wrong, and you have the observatory capacity to notice it, which we do, and we use that, interestingly, we use that observatory capacity to blame others and to think they're responsible. And yet we don't see that that's actually a metaphor for what we're not doing in our own experience by saying, oh, I'm the one causing that. Wouldn't exist if I wasn't here. I wouldn't be thinking about it if I didn't have something to do with it. Just exactly what Les said earlier. So I can think I have a little to do with it and still think that somehow the absolute is parts and pieces, or I can begin to see I have everything to do with it. I am here. If I have been given everything and I'm squandering it on small ideas that I don't have everything, that's a choice. I can do that. And I can also suffer feeling less than, and feeling no place, and feeling like I don't belong, and all those consequential things that constantly have me want people to like me and to like what I have to say and to not contest me in some way or another, and to give me all those kudos, to give me this idea that I'm really great when I know that the great I think I am is literally just a lie about who I am and what I am and where I am and when I am and all those things. It's a silly sideshow that does not seem very funny when we take it personally because we think it's who we are. And that's the only reason we take things personally. Because if we have everything, there's nothing to take. And there's nothing to give. Everybody's already got it. And this conversation started by coming to that point and realizing if everybody's already got it, then talking about it would certainly give everybody a chance to begin to notice that. Not because of what I say, but because of what they're capable of, because they're already inherently knowing of that. In absolute terms, not in some subjective terms according to how they do or what I think of them. My thinking of that is irrelevant. So if we all have that and we operate on that basis, our thinking is going to naturally, just as the book says, we'll straighten out physically and emotionally. It's our thinking that's straightening out because we're no longer trying to create this divergent path of proving it's true, proving it's real, proving I'm right. Self-indignation has been used to kill people on this planet for as long as humans have existed, pretty much. I mean, even the story of Cain and Abel, I think Cain killed his brother. You know, this is like the first kids. Even if it's just a story, it's been told for a long enough time to get the point. And yet we still don't get the point to be doing what we're doing and the way we're doing it, making believe it's all we can do. It's not true, but we can think it is. And to the degree that we do, we're all participating in all of those outcomes. As dismal and degrading and pathetic as they are, we are all part of it. Absolute parts of all of it. Not some of it, all of it. Not the things we just think we are for or against, all of it. And I'm not sorry to say that.
What if somebody wanted to go from righteous indignation to deliberately creating a life that they would want instead of having righteous indignation?
But they're creating the righteous indignation. I mean, that's coming to terms with what you're doing is what you're doing. You know, this idea of getting over stuff has historically supported the contention that we think if we're not thinking we're doing something, we're no longer doing that thing. And normally what we do is, well, what I need to do is stop being righteously indignation. Well, the reason we're righteously indignant is because we make believe that who we are is what we think. We've turned right into wrong. No wonder we're right. There is no righteousness. There is no right and righteousness. It's either right or it's wrong in terms of it either works and it's healthy and the responsible thing to do, the valuable thing to do, because it's shared and benefits everyone, Not just some, not just the most, but everyone, compared to it's wrong and I'm going to try to make it look right and pretend that, and now I'm going to actually take the next step and try to make believe I'm not even thinking that by acting like I'm not at all. And now you've created sociopathic, psychopathic behaviors. We know all the diagnosis, we see it. And to imagine it's all coming out of this one thought that all we are is what we think, and who we are is what we think, and that's it, is a contaminant that has woven its apparency through human history and continues. And to see it as an addiction at least assigns some authority for it, I guess, in trying to make believe we have nothing to do with it. To start to look at addiction basically is the idea that the wrong thing is right and the only thing I can do, and that the irresponsible thing, the thing that's killing me, is all I can do. It's all that, as though it has control over me. The substance has control over me. It's, what do they call it? It's addictive, not my thinking. To see a thinking as the source of that addiction is to begin to dispel the rumors that have been perpetuating the mythology about addiction and the ideas about solving it, which don't seem to be working for things to be at the place they are today, where they've got more addiction than ever. You may be helping, or the overdose rate may be helped by new drugs, but that isn't fixing a problem. That's actually treating a symptom. Socially, we're not well and mentally. We call ourselves a civilization and we do not act civilized. And I speak for all those occurrences out there because I am not apart from any of them. I am a part of all of them. And I would suspect we all are. And to think that way and talk that way is a chance to actually have it isn't what I do alone that helps. It's what we all do together that hurts. If that's the case, that's what it will take to do the thing, to make the things right that are wrong, is to do it collectively, to see ourselves as like an organism, a single organism, or a species. We're built on the same platform. We ought to act like it. And I say that because it would be the natural thing to do and the most elevated thing to do. And to be stuck in a loop of making believe it'll never happen and can't be done is to continue to perpetuate the idea that the absolute nature is not absolute at all, and it's dependent solely on what we think about it. That's gone on long enough. I don't think we have any obligation to continue, but we can, and we are, to the degree that we're doing it. We feel compelled enough to continue. I had a third grade teacher who used to say to me, specifically, silence is golden, so shut up and get rich.
I love that.
So I take the silence as an enriching process, because I know to contemplate this honestly is to face fears that have been induced by our own thinking. They're not real. And I want you to listen to those words if you can hear those words, because most of what's used to justify not looking honestly are ideas that are untrue, that are very disturbing, that cause more disturbance, but compel us in directions of making believe that looking honestly is hard to do. It isn't. It's the simplest thing, because it actually resolves, it dissolves rather than resolves over and over again. It dissolves the problem, because you begin to see that just like the fog seems to be a thick cloud, it isn't when the sun comes out. It disappears, it dissipates. And that dissolution is exactly what happens when the light of our own awareness, that absolute knowing awareness, is light, at least in historic terms or metaphoric terms. So we're going to use it in those terms, since we seem to like narratives. When the light shines in fog, it dissipates. It just disappears. It doesn't look like it was anywhere once it's gone. It doesn't go and huddle somewhere else. It just evaporates, just like all the moisture held in the air, the humidity that's held in the air. Seems to be invisible, but it's there. These things we think are real are not real. They are simply caused by the insistence that we continue to fix them and maintain them as though they're real. I can't fix something that doesn't exist. And to think I can is to think it must exist. That's all on me. That's all on what I'm choosing to do in my human experience. I'm not struggling with a spiritual experience except to the degree that I'm struggling with my thinking about that experience that is incorrect and I believe is true as a result. That's where the conflict comes in. It's not thinking wrong that's the problem. It's thinking wrong is right is the problem. And as any honesty approaches looking at that, if you begin to notice the words you use in relation to the experience you're having and attribute rather those words rather than to the circumstances, the situation, the consequences that you're pointing at, point those words to the thinking you're doing, because thinking is creating those words that are coming from the feelings, the sensations that we've collectively made decisions about. All those sensations that we get all day long are innumerable, probably impossible to count the amount of information that we're constantly perceiving, taking in. And what we decide about those things is where we struggle. And we have no obligation, by the way, to decide anything about anything. We won't eat if we don't, but you could certainly take an hour off of decision making and just observe things with open eyes. It doesn't have to be in a quiet space with a waterfall and a sound machine and soft music and an environment that induces calm. It can be an absolute chaotic environment, just observing it, looking at how quick we want to make decisions about stuff. That's all coming from this idea that we need to define it for it to be, because we don't think it exists if it isn't for our conclusion about it. Notice if you watch things, you'll start seeing there's a lot going on you don't pay attention to typically because of that narrowed down focus of choice to determine that seeming self-determination coming up with a decision about it, rather than just watching it. Eckhart Tolle talks about a year he spent sitting on a park bench and just watching everything. And I would say he had an experience enough to have communicated now to tens of millions of people about presence and now. And I think the addictive aspect of this tracks back to Buddha. Buddha talked about entanglement and clinging and attachment, where the suffering lived. He was talking about addiction.
Now, what do you think if Eckhart Tolle thought somebody stole his watch? What do you think Eckhart Tolle would do?
He would have been pissed at himself.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was wearing it the whole time. I don't know. I would leave that to him. But my sense is that the clarity is natural. The honesty is natural because it's in alignment with how things are. If something's wrong and you look at it as wrong, it's going to dissipate. If you look at it as right, you're creating a conflict. It's what we're doing with what we're thinking, not just what we're thinking that's causing the problem. Thinking isn't the problem. It's thinking we can overcome it, should fix it, should do something else with it because we don't like what it's saying. If what it's saying is accurate, it's probably worth listening to that accuracy and starting to apply those decisions we make in that direction rather than in this idea that we need to feel better all the time and try to get over it. It's actually reinforcing the problem. It's exactly what addiction does. I have a drink, I feel better, my problems don't get better, they actually get worse during that time. And in the mental case, the tolerance from alcohol and drugs that often leads to overdoses, the tolerance we're talking about becomes denial, the ability to deny things and think that by denying them, we're better off. We're creating this psychic anesthesia and becoming desensitized as we go and becoming numb. That awareness we have is a guidance system to protect us and to give us, not only to allow us to survive, but to give us the fruits of that awareness to thrive, and have much more than we'd ever need or want. So much more to give to anyone else who might be suffering or struggling, to help buoy those who are not in identical conditions or similar conditions.
How can we help society love helping each other instead of hoarding money and resources? Because I don't want to blame them for it, but I want to, for me, I mean, I didn't know when I was drinking and everything how fun it is to actually help somebody find their own light. And that is priceless to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm watching a society, there are tons of people that are doing what I'm doing as well, and as you are as well. And I just know that if people understood that more, they would want to do that instead of wanting to. I feel like they feel like having people have less than them makes them feel better. And I don't think it's their fault that they feel that way. They just don't understand that helping other people feels great.
Well, to the question you asked before about what are some of the other examples of things we do that are sort of opposite,
Mm-hmm.
help in our society is often helping people get worse.
Right.
And
I
and you
know,
and
I
you
know. I'm not helping people get worse. I really help people.
well, to the degree though we think of society as something separate from us rather than a product of us, you and I right now,
Right.
we start thinking of it as something they need to do because we're doing that same thing of I'm doing it better, they're doing it worse. That's that comparison of I'm better, they're worse. The fact is they know. If there's an absolute knowing sense, they know. They all know. And if we
They
talk about
know?
them,
I think they know. I don't think so.
absolutely.
I don't think so. I think if
I
they,
know you don't. That's why I'm making the point.
right.
If there's an absolute knowing sense, everyone knows. It doesn't mean they're thinking correctly, and it doesn't mean they think they know, but it means they know. And to get that piece is to start to see not only hope, but begin to see that there's the faith in faithfulness doesn't take much faith. This idea that we need this ending amount of faith, that we're constantly trying to develop faith. We're trying to develop faith to overcome our commitment to something that's completely faithless and something that has no basis whatsoever. That's why faith seems to be this thing that we always need more of. We always need more of, like we need to feel better all the time. If we're thinking about it incorrectly, we're acting on it incorrectly. And if we're thinking about it as something apart from us, we're thinking about it as something we don't have anything to do with. So society is us. We are all that society, every single one of us. And it is doing exactly what we want it to do for us to be where we are right now. Because if it wasn't, if we didn't want it, it would be doing something else. But what it's doing is what it's doing right now. All of us are part of that. So in terms of help, often we're enabling people. We're giving them more room to be comfortable while not giving them the chance to come to terms with their own experience in exactly the way that we're talking about it here. If the core issue, this seeming self-diagnosis, is that nobody can really diagnose another drug addict, alcoholic, compulsive behavior. Nobody can do that for somebody. The reason is we have the free will to make choices, and it's the choices we're making that are giving us the impression we don't have free will. If I'm helping that person who hasn't chosen to notice that, I'm going to help them get worse. And I've done that so many times where I think I'm helping and I'm realizing that I'm trying to do for them what they're perfectly capable of doing, because I don't think they know. I think what they need is what I have, because I am the source of reality. I am the source of what they need. They don't have that source. It's a lie. If an absolute source is absolute, we all know it. We don't have to be acting like we know it to know it. We don't have to think we know it to know it. But as you and I start thinking that way, our thinking becomes inclusive of everyone rather than exclusive of anyone.
I guess I know it.
I mean, here's a question, Jackie. Do you think that alcohol ever really saved you or was a solution?
It was when I didn't know any better.
Well, it seemed to be, right?
Right.
Within the limited thoughts you had, that wasn't reality. That was just a limited scope of thought. So when you thought your reality was that limited scope of thought, you thought you didn't know anymore. Well, that doesn't mean you didn't know anymore. That means what you thought you knew was limited to only what you thought. There again, thinking becomes reality. Not the case. Impossible. So it somewhat counters what AA talks about. But AA is largely treating a symptom and pointing us in the direction of an absolute nature simultaneously. It's all in the book. It's all talked about. We go from finite objectives to infinite reality. Our heads are in the cloud, our feet are on the planet, on the earth, where the work is done. Heads are in the cloud. What do you mean? Elevated. Free. In absolute terms. Do many of us experience that? No. Not in terms of our thinking relationship to it. Can we? Yes. In fact, we are all the time. We just don't think we are, because we're still reliant addictively on this idea that we got to get our thinking right to finally be spiritual. People say, oh, they're really spiritual because he wears a turban or a cotton swab on his head. You know, and think about the way we deal with that. We create these elaborate outfits for people who are supposed to be really spiritual.
Yeah.
It's kind of silly. We talk about God being in heaven, not here. Talk about God as a man.
I often think that people that think they have to wear these outfits, and it's fine if they like the outfits, that's great. But if they don't, but they think they have to, I think it's funny that I feel like when they die and when they find out that whole time they didn't have to wear the outfits, they're going to be like, oh man, I wore that outfit for no reason. That's how I feel about the cold showers too. I'm like, the cold showers are torture for me. Like, it's already cold enough just getting out of the shower. Forget putting cold water on myself. And the last thing I want is to be okay, maybe it does work, but I have other tools that work for me. And the last thing I want is to be giving myself these cold showers if they don't really work.
Well, I think they stimulate the body, and it seems to raise the heartbeat. It stimulates the body to respond, and probably is a great activator for the body, especially people who live in colder climates. They seem to take advantage of that quite a bit. We don't have that in California, since when it's under 70, everybody says it's freezing.
Right. It's true.
But there are things we can do that are uncomfortable that are healthy. It doesn't always mean it's comfortable. Growing in the direction of comfort is becoming acclimated and used to things. And actually, if you're doing healthy things, it's going to become easier to do those things rather than harder. To do the impossible thing is constantly developing an impossibility for a future rather than one that actually contains possibility. Except for one thing, that impossibility is where the learning occurs. It's where the potential to finally give up comes from. That moment of clarity, that moment where you say, you know what? What I learned is that a bottom is where I stop digging. And I'm still digging holes in certain respects. I'm still fighting for things that aren't true as true. I can tell by the time when I get irritated, when I look at things socially, I don't accept them. I don't like them. I'm at odds with them. Doesn't mean I'm ever going to win that fight, but to notice it is to become obvious about it. And a lot of that begins to dissolve naturally. But it also, in this process, reveals other things. Kind of like the iceberg gets bigger as it comes up out of the water. And to become aware of a few things in this absolute sense is to start to become aware of all those things. And it can be a bit daunting because imbued in all of those things, every bit of lie that I maintain is a charge in my body that I'm trying to protect from releasing. And it's creating tension, and it's giving me the impression it's who I am and what I'm made of. All that tension. Releasing that is a real, it isn't quite letting go of it as much as it is constantly, as it is beginning not to constantly insist on it. It's just beginning to say, oh, I have no obligation to continue to drink. I have no obligation to continue to smoke pot. I have no obligation to continue to use cocaine. I have no obligation to continue to make believe my thinking about my thinking itself is myself. I have no obligation to make believe that the conflicts I'm experiencing have nothing to do with me. And then come to believe, oh, those conflicts have all been caused by my thinking. If it weren't for my thinking, I wouldn't be thinking about them as conflicts. They wouldn't exist. If I was in a coma, I wouldn't be bothered by any of it. If I didn't exist, it wouldn't bother me. So if this knowing nature is natural, why is it every tree seems to know it and every molecule seems to operate on that basis, and we yet think other people don't have it and don't know it because they're not thinking they have it? It's because we're still thinking. Thinking is our source. Thinking is our reality. Thinking is the determinator of reality and our experience of it. It isn't. We're already experiencing it right now. We're just preoccupied and consumed and intoxicated with the problems we create to the degree that we think we're in them rather than watching them. And meditation is all about beginning to watch that parade rather than think we're in it. It happens naturally because it's naturally happening right now. If we look, we will see. If we look for what we're looking for, we will not see those things. Just like Anthony missed the watch. Thought it was lost. All he found, he didn't see the watch. He saw everything else but the watch. It's easy to do. We can do it in simple terms. Imagine the terms we're doing that in that seem incredibly complex and incredibly impossible and something we could never possibly let go of. But I don't think we need to start anywhere but where we are with what we have and what's happening. If you notice what's happening in your experience and listen to the words you use as accurate assessments of the thinking you're doing in relation to the things you're experiencing, it begins to take the seeming charge away because you're no longer supercharging that thinking with this idea that it is reality and truth, and you need to fix it and correct it and finally get that argument, that internal voice or voices, finally get them to sing a chorus that's actually harmonious. It's not going to happen. They don't exist. It's just our thoughts that we're giving credit as being reality that we think now have a voice of their own and act on their own and act against us and can be intrusive and can attack us. They can't. It's all part of the same supposition that we've created to justify what we're doing and excuse it as something we can't do anything about because we have nothing to do with it. If that were true, we would not exist. And if we didn't exist, we certainly wouldn't be contemplating our existence. So homework, Jackie?
Yeah.
Just begin to wonder. One of the things I started doing years back when I started noticing this is say, so here's the thought I think is true.
Ooh.
This is also Katie Byron stuff or Byron Katie stuff. Could the opposite also be true? If this is a thought and it's in this thinking that's a process, because thinking is a process, right? It's in this relative scheme. Any position I take also has an equal and opposing position simultaneously. If I say I am here, I am also saying I am not there. If I'm saying now, I'm saying not then, simultaneously. So if I am thinking something, if it's real, I don't need to think about it at all, because the opposite of reality in an absolute sense is reality. The opposite of true in an absolute sense is true. There is no opposite in it because there are no parts or pieces. There is no dimension. So if I consider that my thought that I think is true for a day or a minute, 10 minutes, and just say, what if the opposite is also true? If this can be true because I'm thinking it, begins to define the thinking that we think is reality versus the knowing that we know is reality. Because in the knowing, if we thought the opposite, it would be the same. In the thinking, the opposite would be everything but the thing we're thinking. And it's an easy way to begin to notice the conflicts begin to dissipate because the whole charade is sort of unmasked. It's kind of like when Alice, or what was her name, Dorothy, pulled the curtain back on the Wizard of Oz. He wasn't all those things he projected. He was just an old man standing at a keyboard or a switchboard, manipulating things. And you don't even have to say maybe the opposite is true. Just say it's possible. If it's possible, there's any other possibility. It's certainly possible the possibility you think is absolutely true and real isn't true or real. It's just a thought concluded to be truth and reality. We don't need to conclude truth and reality, because truth and reality has never been exclusive, has never been unincluded. It's already been everything and everything and everything and all things and all not things and things beyond our comprehension to even begin to understand. But it would be an all-knowing present, exactly as the book describes. Infinite, absolute, unlimited, all-knowing, omnipotent. And omniscience would be a good one to add. Omnipresence, another one to add. Meaning all for all. All for all, not some for some. Not because I think I have it, everybody else doesn't have it. Starting to see that we're talking about absolute terms, no exceptions whatsoever, no opinions whatsoever. Nothing I can think about it has any impact on it whatsoever. None. That can be very reassuring, and it can also be very alarming when you begin to look at the things you've been maintaining as reality and truth and realize that they haven't been that the whole time. But that crossover, that transition, since you're dealing with reality, is fulfilling and satisfying in a way that you can't possibly predict or expect. Love you guys and
Love you
gals.
too. This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, let's continue during the week too, Jackie, if you'd like.
Yeah, I would love it.
We
And
can do another interlude.
yeah. And I'm not getting the emails for some reason. I guess I got them at some point, but I just looked for the one you just said that you sent and I didn't get it.
I'll check again, but I saw you specifically in the list yesterday, so I'll check where it's going.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I read through it every week, so I know exactly. But
Okay.
it seemed to me it was in there, but I will double check.
I'll double check as well.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Anthony, thanks for your contribution and hanging in.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony.